All right, get ready to dive deep, everyone, because today we're tackling Peter Senge's The Fifth Discipline.
A classic.
It really is. This book's practically a legend in the world of organizational learning, and you always hear people talking about building a learning organization, but what's it even mean, really?
Well, that's where Senge's work is so insightful,
Yeah.
He draws this connection between how we learn as individuals and how entire companies can evolve.
So, like, instead of just having a few brilliant minds at the top, it's about everyone at every level constantly learning and adapting.
Exactly. Imagine a company that thrives on change, not just survives it. That's the power of a learning organization.
Makes you wonder why this isn't the norm, right?
Yeah.
But then again, look at how many big-name companies have vanished over the years. Like, did you know a third of the Fortune 500 companies from way back in 1970 were gone just 13 years later?
It's a pretty stark reminder for sure.
Like, adapt or die, practically. And Senge doesn't sugarcoat it. He says companies can develop these learning disabilities.
Yeah, these ingrained habits that make it hard to see change coming, let alone respond to it effectively.
Like that story Senge tells about those French monarchs in the 14th century, the Valois.
Oh, right. They devalued their currency thinking it was a good idea at the time,
But they didn't really grasp the consequences, how it would ripple out and affect the whole kingdom.
it's a classic example of what Senge calls a learning disability in action.
And then there's the beer game. This simulation from the book blew my mind.
Oh, yeah. The beer game, it's deceptively simple.
It is just simulating a beer distribution chain. Retailers, wholesalers, the brewery.
Each player's deciding how much beer to order each week to meet demand. Sounds easy, right?
Right, but what usually happens, utter chaos.
Chaos.
Huge backlogs of beer, wild inventory swings. It's amazing how quickly it all goes haywire.
It's a powerful way to see how our natural instincts can backfire, especially in systems.
You end up with everyone pointing fingers, the brewery's too slow, my retailer's ordering way too much. It's like this pressure cooker of blame.
And that's the brilliance of the beer game. It reveals our tendency to fixate on events, those isolated moments, instead of the structures behind them.
So instead of just reacting to a big order or a delay, we need to zoom out and see the bigger picture.
Exactly. That's what systems thinking is all about, seeing those interconnections.
It's like we're hardwired to find someone or something to blame, but sometimes it's the system itself.
Right, and until you see that, you're stuck in the cycle of reaction. Which brings us to another of Senge's key points, shifting the burden.
So instead of tackling the root problem, we reach for the quick fix, like popping a painkiller for a headache every day without ever figuring out why we have the headache in the first place.
Precisely. It might feel good in the moment, but you're not really solving anything long term.
And that's where the fifth discipline comes in, right?
Right.
This concept of systems thinking and the core discipline of what Senge calls a learning organization.
Exactly, and it ties into those other disciplines he outlines: personal mastery, mental models, shared vision, and team learning.
And Senge is clear that systems thinking is what brings them all together.
It's the glue, and just to be clear, it's not about becoming some kind of systems expert.
It's more about understanding how our actions within those systems, the way they interact, actually create the reality we experience.
Right, so it's less about textbook knowledge and more about recognizing that we're all part of these interconnected systems and our actions have ripple effects.
Okay, give me a real-world example. What's something concrete that illustrates this systems thinking idea?
Think about the arms race. Each side, on its own, thought it was acting rationally to boost its own security.
Right, build up your weapons to protect yourself. Seems logical.
But the problem was, they were so focused on their own actions, they missed the bigger picture. The more one side armed up, the more the other side felt like it had to do the same.
It's like a vicious cycle, and it ended up making everyone less safe.
Exactly.
Right.
So systems thinking is about taking that step back, seeing the interconnectedness, the long-term consequences.
Which reminds me of Senge's concept of creative tension, right? Part of what he talks about within that personal mastery discipline is that gap between where we are and where we want to be.
And it's not about getting discouraged by that gap. It's about recognizing that it can be a powerful source of energy.
So, like, instead of getting overwhelmed by how far we have to go, we can use that as fuel to propel us forward.
Right. Think about any goal you've ever worked towards. That tension, that desire for something more is what keeps us moving.
But we've got to understand how our own minds work if we want to harness that energy, right?
Absolutely. And that's where our mental models come into play.
These are the beliefs and assumptions we carry around, often without even realizing it, that shape how we see the world.
They're the lens through which we interpret everything.
Senge uses that example of Detroit automakers,
Yeah.
how they were so focused on styling and big engines, they completely missed the shift in consumer demand towards, I don't know, fuel efficiency.
They were blinded by their own assumptions, and it cost them, which is why it's so important to be aware of those mental models, to bring them to the surface.
And be willing to challenge them, even when it's uncomfortable.
Especially when it's uncomfortable, because those unexamined assumptions can really hold us back.
And that naturally leads us to the importance of shared vision, doesn't it? It's not about forcing one person's vision on everyone else.
Right. It's about creating something that resonates deeply with the group because it reflects their shared values and aspirations.
And when you have that, it's powerful. Like when Kennedy set that audacious goal of landing a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s.
It galvanized an entire nation.
It did. It was this shared purpose that sparked incredible acts of courage and innovation.
A testament to the power of a shared vision to unite people.
And speaking of teams, that brings us to the whole concept of team learning. Senge argues that it's not just about working together well, it goes deeper than that.
It's about recognizing that the team itself is capable of learning and growing. Like the Boston Celtics under Red Auerbach, they weren't just talented individuals.
They were a true team, in every sense of the word, like a well-oiled machine, everyone's strengths working together towards a common goal.
And that's what team learning is all about. It's about mastering the art of dialogue and discussion. It's about tapping into that collective intelligence.
So it's about more than just having a shared vision.
Right. It's about learning how to have those really productive, sometimes difficult conversations where you break down those defensive routines and actually listen to each other's perspectives.
Because none of us has all the answers, right?
Exactly. We can achieve far more when we learn to think and act as a unified whole.
So when we talk about building a learning organization, it sounds like it's an ongoing process, a journey, rather than a destination.
It is. It's about embracing the idea that we should never stop learning and adapting, both individually and as a group.
Which, when you think about it, is a pretty exciting way to approach work and life in general.
It is. It's about being open to new possibilities, to seeing challenges as opportunities for growth.
And to recognizing that we're all in this together.
And that's the beauty of Senge's work. It's not just some pie-in-the-sky theory. It's a practical roadmap for navigating this crazy, complex world we live in. He's giving us the tools to understand how these systems work and how we can show up differently within them.
It really makes you realize how much those hidden assumptions, the mental models we don't even know we have, can trip us up.
Oh, absolutely. Like those optical illusions, where you see one thing and then suddenly, bam, your perception shifts and you see something completely different.
It's like that, and you had no idea you were even being tricked.
Exactly. We're all looking through these lenses, shaped by our own unique experiences, beliefs, all those unconscious biases.
And often we're totally clueless about how much those lenses are coloring what we see.
Right, and Senge's saying, hey, we need to become aware of those lenses, examine them, maybe even try on a few different pairs.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we become more aware of our own mental models and start challenging them in a way that leads to real change?
Well, Senge talks about two key practices: reflection and inquiry. Reflection is all about hitting pause on that autopilot in our minds,
Like taking a step back.
Exactly. It's about slowing down, examining how we form those mental models in the first place. Where do those assumptions come from? Are they even still true?
It's asking ourselves those tough questions like, am I just blindly accepting this as true? Or is there more to the story?
Exactly. And inquiry. Well, that's about taking that self-reflection and bringing it into our interactions with others.
Okay, so getting those thoughts out of our heads and into the open.
Precisely. Inquiry is about nurturing our curiosity. It's about being open to learning from other people, having those honest conversations where we're not afraid to lay our assumptions bare, to ask questions, and really, truly listen to the answer.
And be open to being wrong.
Exactly, because none of us has a monopoly on the truth. And this reminds me of something Senge said about the subconscious mind and learning.
It sounds counterintuitive because usually we think of learning as this very conscious process.
It does. But Senge argues that the subconscious can handle way more complexity than our conscious minds can.
So it's like we have this untapped potential for making connections, seeing patterns just bubbling away beneath the surface.
Exactly. It's incredible when you think about it. And Senge says we can actually tap into that subconscious intelligence.
Like how? Meditation.
Meditation, reflection, even paying attention to our dreams. He believes the subconscious can play a huge role in helping us see the world systemically, to grasp those connections our conscious minds might miss.
But how do we avoid those leaps of abstraction he talks about, where we jump to conclusions without testing our assumptions?
Right, like taking a mental shortcut, which sounds efficient but often leads us down the wrong path.
That's like we cook up these stories in our heads to make sense of things.
Which is human nature, right? We're storytelling creatures.
We are. But often, those stories are based on incomplete information or faulty logic. And because we haven't checked our assumptions, we keep acting on them, even when they're no longer serving us.
And those assumptions then become those mental models that we were talking about earlier.
The ones that can be so hard to break free from.
Exactly. So how do we avoid those mental traps? How do we stay grounded, making decisions rooted in reality and not just our own heads?
Yeah, it's easy to get stuck in our own little worlds.
It is. Senge talks about cultivating a commitment to the truth.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It's about being willing to question everything, even those deeply held beliefs that we hold near and dear. It means actively seeking out information that challenges our views and being open to changing our minds when presented with new evidence. It's about being honest with ourselves and each other about what we see and what we don't know.
It's about embracing that vulnerability, that willingness to say, I don't know, or I was wrong.
Exactly. And that kind of honesty and transparency is essential for building trust, not just in our personal lives, but in our teams and organizations too.
Because without trust, you can't really collaborate or innovate effectively, right?
Absolutely. Trust is foundational. It allows for open communication, real collaboration, and a willingness to be vulnerable with each other, to admit when we need help. When we're committed to the truth, it creates an environment where people feel safe to share their ideas, to challenge each other, and to learn from their mistakes without fear of punishment.
Which circles back to the interconnectedness of all these disciplines, right? Personal mastery, mental models, shared vision, team learning. They all support and reinforce each other.
Exactly. It's all connected. That's the essence of systems thinking, seeing the web of relationships, the patterns, the interconnectedness between things, and recognizing that our actions have consequences that ripple outward, impacting not just ourselves, but the entire system.
It's like the butterfly effect, that even a small change in one part of a system can have a massive impact somewhere else.
Exactly. And that's why systems thinking is so crucial, especially when it comes to building these learning organizations we keep talking about. When we can step back, when we can see the whole system, we start to understand how our actions impact the system as a whole. And that allows us to make better decisions, more conscious choices that support the long-term well-being of everyone involved.
So it sounds like systems thinking isn't just a tool or technique. It's a fundamental shift in how we see the world, how we make sense of things.
It's a profound shift. We have to move beyond that linear cause and effect way of thinking. We have to embrace the complexity, the interconnectedness, even the uncertainty of this world.
And accept that we're all part of that interconnected web and our actions matter.
Yes. Our actions shape the system for better or worse. Which brings us back to the idea of shared vision, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
That cornerstone of a learning organization that Senge keeps coming back to.
Right. He's very clear that it's not about imposing one person's vision on everyone else.
It's about creating something that people are truly committed to, something that resonates deeply with their own values and aspirations. It's about tapping into that well of collective wisdom and creating something that feels meaningful and aspirational to everyone involved.
And he shares some really inspiring examples of this, right? Like John F. Kennedy's vision of landing a man on the moon, which, I mean, talk about an audacious goal.
It captured the hearts and minds of a nation. Or the story of People Express Airlines.
I don't know that one.
It's a fascinating story. In its early days, People Express achieved remarkable success because of the shared passion of its employees.
So it was that collective commitment that really fueled their initial success.
It was. But there's a reason we don't see People Express planes flying around today. As the company grew, new challenges emerged, and that shared sense of meaning began to erode.
It's a good reminder that it's not enough to just craft a shared vision. You have to nurture it, keep it alive.
Exactly. It's like tending a garden. You can't just plant the seeds and walk away. You have to water them, weed them, create the conditions for them to thrive.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So it's about ongoing dialogue, open communication, and being willing to adapt and evolve as the organization grows and changes.
Absolutely. And it shows how interconnected these disciplines really are. A shared vision can only thrive in an environment where people are committed to their own personal mastery, where teams are constantly learning and growing together.
And that leads us to another key concept that Senge emphasizes: localness. It's this idea of empowering the people who are closest to the action to make decisions.
Yes, it's about recognizing that the folks on the front lines, they often have the best understanding of what's actually happening, what works, what doesn't.
Because they're the ones living and breathing it every day.
Right. And Senge would argue that empowering people at that local level is essential for fostering adaptability, for driving innovation. When people feel empowered to make decisions, take ownership, they come up with creative solutions. They become more proactive.
But that requires a real shift in mindset, doesn't it? For leaders to let go of some control and trust that people will step up.
It does. It's a fundamental shift from control to trust.
And that's not always easy.
It's not. It requires leaders to redefine their roles. They're no longer the heroes with all the answers.
They become facilitators, mentors, creating the space for others to shine.
Exactly. Which reminds me of another one of Senge's systems archetypes, the tragedy of the commons.
Right. That's where everyone acts in their own self-interest, even if it ends up hurting everyone in the long run.
It's a classic example of how our individual actions, while seemingly rational in isolation, can lead to collective disaster. Like, imagine a shared pasture.
Right.
Each herdsman thinks, okay, I'll just add one more animal to my herd. Seemingly no big deal, right?
Yeah.
But if everybody does that, the pasture is stripped bare and nobody can graze their animals.
It's a recipe for disaster. And Senge gives the example of a company that decentralizes, giving more autonomy to different divisions. Sounds good in theory.
It does, but what sometimes happens is that those divisions start competing for the same resources: money, technology, talent.
And it becomes a race to the bottom.
Exactly. Or think about a team where everyone is laser focused on their individual targets, their own metrics. They lose sight of the team's overall goals, and ultimately, everyone suffers.
So how do we prevent these tragedies of the commons, whether it's in a company or in society as a whole?
It goes back to that idea of a shared vision, doesn't it? When we're aligned around a common purpose, when we see ourselves as part of something larger than ourselves, we're more likely to make decisions that benefit the whole, even if it means making individual sacrifices.
It's that sense of we're all in this together.
Exactly. And Senge talks about this company that decided to be radically honest with those customers, even if it meant losing some business in the short term.
Really?
Yeah, they believed that building trust, fostering those long-term relationships, was more important than chasing every single sale.
That's a bold move. But it's also a powerful example of how prioritizing ethical behavior and long-term thinking can lead to greater success.
It is. It's about recognizing that our actions have consequences and that building a better future requires us to act with integrity, to consider the needs of all stakeholders.
It's interesting, isn't it? We've been talking about all these interconnected ideas, but there's always this resistance to change, whether it's in ourselves or the organizations we're a part of.
It's a powerful force. Senge calls it the enemy within. That voice that makes us doubt, that clings to old habits, that prefers what's comfortable even when it's no longer serving us.
It's like that little voice is saying, stay in your lane, don't try anything new.
Right? And Senge says those mental models we talked about, those deeply ingrained assumptions, can become like this internal immune system.
Fighting off anything that challenges the status quo.
Exactly. We build up these fortresses of belief around ourselves, like, this is what I believe, and that's that.
Safe but stagnant.
Exactly. Those walls, those defensive routines, they're tough to break down. They show up as blame shifting, refusing to admit mistakes, clinging to what's familiar, even when it's clearly not working.
So how do we start to dismantle those defensive routines? Senge talks about building a learning infrastructure within organizations. What does that look like in practice?
It's about creating a support system, just like you said, to empower people to become lifelong learners. Things like workshops on systems thinking, mentorship programs, creating those cross-functional teams where people can experiment and share what they're learning openly.
It's about creating a space where it's safe to experiment, to fail, to learn from those failures.
Exactly. That infrastructure provides the support for a learning organization to really take shape. It's fertile ground for people to try out these disciplines, to hone their systems thinking skills, to learn from each other.
And this is where leadership plays such a critical role, right? Because it's not enough to just talk about building a learning organization. Leaders need to walk the walk. They need to embody these principles.
Absolutely. Senge challenges that traditional view of a leader as the hero, The one with all the answers at the top of the hierarchy.
Right. It's not about being the smartest person in the room.
It's not. He says leaders in these learning organizations need to embrace a different approach. Humility, curiosity, a commitment to their own growth.
It's more about we're in this together than I've got this figured out.
Exactly. It's about fostering that culture where learning is valued, where mistakes are seen as opportunities, where people feel empowered to experiment, take risks, push boundaries.
A very different kind of leadership.
It is. It's about enabling people, not controlling them. It's about creating that space where they can contribute their best ideas, where they feel valued, connected to something meaningful, inspired to bring their whole selves to work.
Which brings us back to that idea of building a shared vision, that sense of purpose.
It's foundational, isn't it? When people feel connected to something larger than themselves, when they see how their work contributes to something they believe in, it's incredibly motivating.
But how do you create that? It has to be more than a slogan or a mission statement.
It does. A truly shared vision can't be forced. It has to come from the people within the organization.
So it's about creating a space where those ideas can bubble up, where people feel safe sharing their hopes, their dreams for the organization, even their doubts.
Exactly. A culture of dialogue, where people feel heard, respected, even when they disagree. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the fifth discipline, it strikes me how relevant Senge's ideas are, even all these years later.
It's a book that really stays with you.
It does. He offers such a hopeful perspective on how we can learn, how we can grow, how we can create a better future, not just in our workplaces, but in every aspect of our lives.
It's a call to action, isn't it? To step into that power we all have, to learn, to lead, to create positive change.
It is. And it starts with each of us, challenging our own assumptions, embracing new ways of thinking, and being open to seeing the world through a different lens.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. What if you saw every challenge, every setback, every interaction as an opportunity for learning and growth? How might that simple shift in perspective empower you to create positive change in your own life and in the world around you? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.